The air in the Louisiana State Penitentiary was thick, it was heavy with the unspoken fears of men. On this day, May 3, 1946, that weight pressed down on one man more than any other. His name was Willie Francis. He was just a boy really, only 16 years old. He walked down a long, quiet hallway. Each step was a small thunderclap in the silence of his own mind. The guards beside him were quiet. Their faces were grim, set like stone. They were just doing a job. But this was a job no man is truly made for. It was the job of leading a child to his death. Willie's heart hammered against his ribs. It felt like a trapped bird beating its wings, desperate for escape. He could see the door at the end of the hall. It was a simple wooden door, no different from any other, but he knew what was behind it. He knew it held the end of his short life. The world he knew, the memories he had, the dreams he might have dreamed. He thought about his family. He thought about the small town where he grew up. The door opened. Inside the room, a handful of witnesses stood waiting. Their faces were a blur of curiosity and pity. They were there to watch him die. In the center of the room sat the chair. It was an oak chair, solid and imposing. It looked almost like a throne of death. Straps hung from its arms, straps hung from its legs, wires snaked from its back, connecting it to a power source. This was it, the final destination, the place where the story of Willie Francis was supposed to end. Who was this boy, Willie Francis? How did he end up here on the edge of oblivion at such a young age? His story was a sad one, tangled in the poverty and racial tensions of the 1940s American South. Willie was born in St. Martinville, Louisiana. He was one of 13 children in a poor African-American family. He had to leave school to find work, a common fate for many children in his position. His life was not one of privilege or opportunity. It was a life of struggle from the very beginning, a path that unfortunately led him into trouble with the law. The crime that sealed his fate was a serious one. A local pharmacy owner, a white man named Andrew Thomas, was found murdered. The police investigation was swift, perhaps too swift. They arrested Willie Francis about a year later. He was found in Texas, carrying the victim's wallet. Under interrogation, the police said he confessed. He signed 2 confessions, one saying he acted alone, another implicating others. But there were many questions. Willie was illiterate. He could not read the words he was supposedly signing. There was no physical evidence linking him to the scene of the crime. The trial was a formality, a tragic, rushed affair. Willie's court-appointed lawyers did not call any witnesses. They did not raise any objections. The all-white jury took very little time to deliberate. They came back with a verdict, guilty, and the sentence was death. For a teenager who could not read, who was represented by lawyers who seemed to do nothing, the system offered no mercy. It was a conveyor belt of justice that moved in only one direction. It moved him from a small town to a police station, to a courtroom, and now, to this execution chamber. He was a symbol of a broken system, a system where the color of your skin and the money in your pocket could mean the difference between life and death. He was not a monster. He was a boy caught in a web far bigger than himself. A web of prejudice and legal indifference. As he stood before the electric chair, he was not just Willie Francis. He was a question mark hanging over the very idea of justice in America. A question that was about to get a very shocking and very unexpected answer. The guards led Willie to the oak chair. His movements were stiff, almost robotic. He sat down. The oak chair. The wood felt cold against his skin, even through his thin prison clothes. The witnesses watched in silence. You could hear a pin drop. The guards began to strap him in. Leather straps were tightened around his arms, leather straps around his legs and his chest. He was bound to the machine. He could not move. He was a part of it now. A man and a machine joined together for one final, terrible purpose. He was helpless. A prisoner not just of the state, but of the very chair he sat in. Next came the headpiece. It was a metal cap, often called a skull cap, with a wet sponge inside it. The sponge was meant to conduct the electricity directly into his brain, to make death swift. Or so they hoped. They placed it on his head, covering his eyes with a black leather hood. Suddenly, his world went dark. He could no longer see the witnesses or the guards. He was alone in the blackness, with only the sounds of the room and the frantic beating of his own heart. He could hear the quiet murmur of the executioner and his assistant as they made their final checks. Captain Ephie Foster, the man in charge of the execution, gave the signal. The prison officials had hired a new executioner for this job. He was a fellow inmate, serving time for a lesser crime, who was reportedly drunk. He and his assistant had set up the chair, this gruesome Gertie, themselves. They were not experts. They were just 2 men, given a task they did not fully understand. They had tested the chair, they said. It was ready. In the control booth, the executioner placed his hand on the switch. The final moment had arrived. The warden gave the order. Roll. It was the signal. The executioner threw the switch. A powerful current of electricity was supposed to surge through Willie Francis's body. It was meant to stop his heart and shut down his brain in an instant. The witnesses braced themselves. They expected to see a body convulse, to smell the scent of burning flesh, and then silence. The silence of a life extinguished. But that is not what happened. Something went terribly, horribly wrong, or, depending on your perspective, something went miraculously right. When the switch was thrown, a massive jolt of electricity shot through Willie's body. He convulsed violently against the straps. The chair shook, his body strained as if trying to break free. From beneath the black hood, a scream pierced the stunned silence of the room. "I'm not dying!" the witnesses gasped. This was not supposed to happen. Executions were meant to be quick, clinical. This was chaos. This was torture. The electricity was coursing through him, but it wasn't killing him. It was just inflicting unimaginable pain. The executioner, confused and panicked, kept the current flowing. Willie's lips swelled up, his body twisted in agony. He shouted again, his voice raw with pain. "Take it off! Let me breathe!" The witnesses looked on in horror. They were seeing something that no person should ever see. They were watching a man be tortured to death, but death would not come. The machine was failing. The boy in the chair was alive, conscious and screaming for his life. The smell of burning hair and skin filled the air, a grotesque testament to the chair's brutal but ineffective work. After a few agonizing moments, Captain Foster, seeing the horrific scene unfolding, yelled for the executioner to turn it off. The switch was flipped back. The humming sound stopped. Willie's body went limp, slumping against the straps. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving. He was alive. He had taken the full force of the state's ultimate punishment, and he had survived. The room was in shock. The guards, the witnesses, the warden, no one knew what to do. They had a procedure for execution. They had no procedure for a failed execution. The official story was that the chair had malfunctioned. It was later discovered that the portable electric chair had been set up incorrectly. The inmate who set it up was drunk at the time. He had connected the wires improperly. Instead of a lethal dose of electricity designed to kill instantly, Willie had received a non-lethal but excruciatingly painful shock. He had survived his own execution. He had walked into the valley of the shadow of death, and somehow he had walked back out. The question now was, what on earth happens next? In the immediate aftermath, there was chaos and confusion. The guards unstrapped a dazed and trembling Willie from the chair. He was alive, but he was in terrible pain. He could barely speak. The witnesses were ushered out of the room, their faces pale with shock. They had come to see justice served, but instead, they had witnessed a scene of pure horror. They would carry the memory of Willie's screams with them for the rest of their lives. The story of what happened in that room began to spread like wildfire. A boy had been electrocuted, and he had lived. The prison officials were at a loss. They had a living, breathing, condemned man on their hands, a man who, according to the law, was supposed to be dead. They returned Willie to his cell. He was examined by a doctor who confirmed that, while he was in pain, he was otherwise physically stable. The state of Louisiana was now faced with an unprecedented situation. Did they try to execute him again? Or did his survival mean something more? Was it an act of God? A sign that he should be spared? The legal and moral implications were staggering. Willie himself later described the experience in chilling detail. He said the electricity felt like 100 needles and 1,000 needles and pins pricking him all over. He described tasting cold peanut butter in his mouth. He saw little blue lights. He saw little pink lights. He saw little green lights dancing in front of his eyes. His account was a terrifying window into the reality of what the electric chair does to a human body. It was not a peaceful end. It was a violent, brutal assault on every nerve and every cell. His survival gave a voice to the silent horror of capital punishment. The public reaction was a mixture of fascination and outrage. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. The boy who lived became a headline. Some people were horrified by the state's incompetence and cruelty. They argued that putting Willie through that ordeal a second time would be unthinkable, a clear case of cruel and unusual punishment. Others were steadfast. They believed the law was the law. A sentence had been handed down, and it had to be carried out no matter what. The fate of Willie Francis became a national debate. The state of Louisiana made its position clear. They intended to carry out the execution again. They argued the sentence was death by electrocution. Since Willie had not died, the sentence had not been fulfilled. This decision sparked a fierce legal battle. A young, determined lawyer named Bertrand de Blanc took the case. De Blanc had been a friend of the murdered pharmacist. He was appalled by the failed execution. He believed a second execution would violate the Constitution. De Blanc argued it would be cruel and unusual punishment. Eighth Amendment. He argued it violated double jeopardy. Fifth Amendment. A person cannot be tried for the same crime twice. Willie had been put in jeopardy of his life once. He had faced the executioner. He had faced the chair. Forcing him again would punish him twice. The case moved through the courts, capturing the nation's attention. Francis v. Resweber reached the United States Supreme Court. The 9 justices had to answer a question never asked before. Does a state get a second chance to execute a man after a failed attempt? The legal community was divided. The moral stakes were immense. Willie Francis, an illiterate teenager from small-town Louisiana, was at the center. His life hung in the balance, waiting the court's judgment. In a deeply divided 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled against Willie. The majority said the first attempt was not cruel and unusual in the constitutional sense. It was an accident, an unforeseeable accident. The cruelty was in the equipment's malfunction, not the method itself. Therefore, the state could try again. Double jeopardy did not apply, they concluded. The legal battle was over. Louisiana was given the green light to finish the job. For Willie Francis, the Supreme Court's decision was a death sentence all over again. He had lived for over a year with the memory of that horrific day. He had endured the legal battles, holding on to a sliver of hope that he might be spared. Now, that hope was gone. He was sent back to death row. He had to face the same guards. He had to face the same routine. He had to face the same looming fate. But this time, it was worse. This time, he knew exactly what was coming. He knew the feeling of the straps. He knew the darkness of the hood. He knew the searing pain of the electricity. His lawyer, Bertrand de Blanc, did not give up. He continued to fight, uncovering problems with the original trial. He found evidence that Willie's confession may have been coerced. He discovered another man had once confessed to the murder. That lead had never been properly investigated by the police. De Blanc pleaded with the governor for clemency, presenting the new information. He argued there was too much doubt to execute a man who had already suffered so much. The public outcry grew louder. People from all walks of life voiced concern. Some of them had even once supported the death penalty. They began to question the case. Executing Willie a second time seemed monstrous to many. It felt less like justice and more like a grim obsession. The state, however, remained unmoved. They were determined to see the sentence through. They scheduled a new execution date. For Willie, the days ticked by in a haze of fear and resignation. He was trapped in a nightmare from which he could not awaken. On May 9, 1947, just over a year after he first survived it, Willie Francis was walked to the electric chair for a second time. The chair, gruesome Gertie, had been repaired. It had been checked and double-checked. This time they would make no mistakes. The witnesses were in place. The guards strapped him in. As they prepared him, a witness reported Willie looked at the captain and said, "I'm not going to have to ask you to let me breathe this time." It was a statement of quiet, tragic acceptance. He knew there would be no second miracle. The second execution was carried out successfully. This time the machine worked as intended. At the age of 18, Willie Francis was pronounced dead. His strange, tragic, and improbable story came to a final, definitive end. He had cheated death once, but he could not cheat it twice. The state of Louisiana had finally fulfilled its sentence. But the story of Willie Francis did not die with him. In fact, in death, his story became even more powerful. It raised profound questions that continue to echo through our justice system today. The case left a permanent mark on the debate over capital punishment. It provided a horrifying, real-world example of what can go wrong. It stripped away the clinical language of legal proceedings and exposed the brutal reality of state-sanctioned killing. For opponents of the death penalty, Willie Francis became a martyr. His story was a powerful tool to argue against the cruelty and fallibility of capital punishment. How can a system be just, they asked, if it is capable of such a grotesque error? And how can it be moral to subject a person to that horror twice? Even for those who supported the death penalty, the case was unsettling. It highlighted the immense responsibility that comes with the power to take a human life. It showed that the process is not always clean or efficient. It is carried out by fallible human beings using fallible machines. The image of a drunken inmate setting up an electric chair was a damning indictment of the system's carelessness. The case forced people to confront the uncomfortable details of what an execution actually entails, moving it from an abstract concept to a visceral, human tragedy. Bertrand de Blanc, the lawyer who fought so hard for Willie, was haunted by the case for the rest of his life. He remained convinced of Willie's innocence and the injustice of his fate. The story of Willie Francis has been told and retold in books, documentaries, and songs. He is more than just a historical footnote. He is a permanent reminder of the deep, troubling questions at the heart of our justice system. His short, tragic life and his one impossible moment of survival forced a nation to look in the mirror and ask if this is who we want to be. What do we make of a story like this? A story of a boy who survived his own execution, only to be executed again 1 year later. Was his survival a miracle, a random meaningless accident, or was it something else? Perhaps it was a message from the universe or from God or simply from the laws of probability telling us to pay attention. For 1 year, the world was forced to look at Willie Francis not as a condemned criminal, but as a human being who had been given an impossible second chance. His survival was a cosmic interruption. It was a pause button pressed on the machinery of death. In that pause, we had a chance to reconsider. We had a chance to look at the flaws in the system, the doubts in the case, and the humanity of the boy in the cell. We were given a moment to ask if this was truly justice. Was it an opportunity for mercy? A chance to choose a different path? The story of Willie Francis suggests that fate might not be a straight line. It might be a series of chances of doors opening and closing, but we, as a society, chose to close that door. The legal system, with its rigid logic, overruled the miracle. The machinery was repaired, and the process was completed. The story's final chapter was written not by fate, but by human determination. This makes the story all the more tragic. It's not just a story about a failed execution. It's a story about a failed opportunity for grace. A moment of wonder was met with a cold, bureaucratic response. The system insisted on having the final word. In the end, the story of Willie Francis leaves us with a profound question about life, luck, and justice. It reminds us that life is fragile, and that second chances are incredibly rare. And when they do appear, in whatever strange form they take, they present us with a choice. His story is a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes, even when a miracle happens, we may not be wise enough to accept it. It is a haunting echo from the past, asking us to think carefully about the line between justice and vengeance, and the precious, unrepeatable value of a single human life.